Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take the questions you send us, grab a stack of sources. Today it's excerpts from a YouTube transcript, and we really dig in. We pull out the important stuff, the surprising facts, and basically make sure you walk away feeling, well-informed.
Yeah, that's right. We're looking at the You Ask series today. It's from the Digital Trends YouTube channel. They tackle tech questions from viewers, which is great because you get these very specific problems addressed.
Exactly. And the questions they covered this time take us into some, really interesting spots. First up, TV upscaling. It can get a bit confusing, especially when you throw in something like an Apple TV 4K.
Right.
Then, a head-to-head, the TCL QM6K versus the Sony X90L, always a popular kind of comparison. And third, we're looking at Google's latest AI stuff, specifically for video creation, called VO3.
Yep. So the mission for this deep dive is pretty clear. Cut through any confusion, pull out the key details, and give you the practical takeaways you need from this Q&A. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's start with that upscaling puzzle. This question came from someone named Jiggle, which is a great username.
Yeah.
So Jiggle has a pretty high-end TV, a Panasonic Z95A. Says it has incredible upscaling, which sounds amazing, but, and it's a big but, they really don't like the operating system, the built-in one. It's Amazon Fire TV.
Yeah, not everyone's favorite.
Right, so they're thinking about just using an Apple TV 4K instead of the built-in apps. The big question is the Apple TV's upscaling good enough, or is it so much worse than the Panasonic's incredible upscaling that they should just, stick with the Fire TV inner guts they dislike?
This is such a common thing, isn't it? You buy this awesome TV panel, but the software experience is just not great.
Totally.
So the source material breaks down how this works with the Apple TV 4K. Basically, when you plug in an external box like that, it takes over a lot of the video processing.
Okay.
It grabs whatever you're watching, could be 1080p, 720p, whatever, and it upscales that content to the resolution you've picked in the Apple TV settings.
Right. So if I set my Apple TV to output 4K, it's taking like a standard HD stream from Netflix or something, and it does all the work to make it 4K before it even sends the signal to my Panasonic TV.
Exactly. That's precisely it. The TV still does some processing, naturally, but the main upscaling job, that heavy lifting, that's done by the Apple TV.
And the key thing then is, how good is the Apple TV at doing that job?
Well, the good news, according to the source, is that the Apple TV 4K's upscaling is actually pretty good.
Pretty good. Okay, I like hearing that. But what does that mean visually? Like, if I'm watching typical streaming stuff, will I actually see a difference compared to using the TV's own built-in apps and its supposedly incredible upscaling?
For what the source describes as well-produced content,
Yeah.
Stuff from the big streaming services like Netflix, Max, Disney+, they suggest you probably won't be able to tell the difference.
Really? Okay, that's quite a statement. So the Apple TV holds its own pretty well then, even against a high-end TV's internal processing for everyday viewing.
Seems like it, yeah. That's a pretty strong endorsement for the Apple TV's processing power, at least for most common scenarios.
Okay, now here's the part the source really emphasized. If you do use the Apple TV, there's apparently one setting you absolutely have to get right. What is it?
Yeah, this is crucial. It's in the Apple TV settings, and it's called Match Content Range and Frame Rate.
Match content range and frame rate. Why is that so important?
The source highlights this because it stops the Apple TV from doing something you really don't want it to do. It prevents it from taking standard dynamic range content, SDR, which is, most regular shows and older movies, and trying to artificially boost it into high dynamic range or HDR.
Okay. So it stops it from faking HDR. Why is that bad? What does that look like?
It apparently looks weird. The source calls the result a weird, fake, HDR-looking image. It just doesn't look natural, doesn't look the way the director or creator intended it.
Gotcha.
So turning on match content basically tells the Apple TV, look, if the video is SDR, send it to the TV as SDR. If it's HDR, send it as HDR. Don't mess with the original format. It keeps the picture integrity.
Makes sense. So let the Apple TV upscale the resolution to 4K, for instance, but make absolutely sure it respects the original dynamic range. SDR stays SDR, HDR stays HDR. Simple enough. Now, the source did mention another way to do it, right? Setting the Apple TV to output the original resolution.
It did, yeah. Like sending a 1080p stream as 1080p to the TV and then letting the TV do the final upscale to its 4K panel.
How did the source feel about that approach?
Not very keen on it, actually. Their take was that It feels like too much work for very minimal benefit.
Right. More hassle than it's worth, maybe even detrimental.
Potentially, yeah. They even suggested there's a chance you may be doing more harm than good because you might be limiting what the Apple TV can do effectively at the start of the chain.
Oh.
So the clear advice seems to be, set the Apple TV to output your TV's resolution, like 4K. Turn on match content range and frame rate. And then, for most content, you probably won't be missing out on your TV's built-in upscaling.
Okay, that really clarifies the whole upscaling situation. Very helpful. Now, sticking with picture quality, let's shift to picking a new TV. We got a question from Inquil Subash, who's weighing up two models, the TCL QM6K and the Sony Bravia X90L.
Ah, yes, a classic mid-range battleground.
Exactly. So Inquil is in Dubai, saw a salesperson recommending the Sony. They liked their old Sony TV, but apparently had some durability issues down the line, and they're a bit hesitant about the higher cost of the new Sony. Plus, the salesperson raised a concern about TCL and Henson's TVs being maybe too bright, potentially causing eye strain. And Inquil has a 3-year-old, so that's a real consideration. That's quite a mix of factors.
It really is. You got brand loyalty versus cost, past experience, and this important health concern about eye strain, especially for a child.
Yeah.
Let's tackle that eye strain bit first, because that seems pretty central.
Yeah.
What's interesting is the source addresses this directly. They're careful to say, we're not doctors, but they do cite some research on the topic.
Okay, and what did the research point to? Was it the brightness itself?
Apparently not the main factor. The finding they mentioned suggests it's more the amount of time spent in front of the TV than the TV picture itself that can cause eye strain.
Huh. So it's more about screen time duration, not necessarily the TV's tech specs or how bright it can get.
Yeah.
It's kind of counter to what the salesperson was suggesting.
It does seem to be, yeah.
Oh.
The research implies it's about viewing habits. The source even mentions the standard advice.
No.
Sort of like a 15-minute break every couple of hours, look at something far away.
Right, the 20-20-20 rule
Right.
or something similar.
Exactly. And as the source kind of puts it, do with that what you will. But it does shift the focus. It suggests managing viewing time is maybe more critical than worrying if one specific TV model is inherently too bright for eye safety.
That's actually really helpful perspective, regardless of which TV you buy. Okay, so putting the general eye strain advice aside for a moment, what about the specific claim regarding the TCL being brighter than the Sony? The source actually tested both these TVs. What did their measurements show?
Right, they did test them. And their findings were, well, basically the opposite of that claim. They found the Sony X90L's peak brightness was generally around the same and often higher than the TCL QM6K.
Okay, so the Sony could actually get brighter. Let's break down those numbers they shared. How did they compare in, say, standard dynamic range, SDR?
Sure. So using a standard 10% window test pattern, measuring a small bright area, the Sony measured just shy of 600 nits. Remember, nits are just the unit for brightness.
Got it. 600 nits for the Sony and the TCL.
The TCL QM6K in that same SDR test was around 650 nits.
Okay, so very close, actually. TCL slightly brighter in that specific SDR test window. Now, what about HDR? High dynamic range? That's where TVs are really supposed to shine. Literally, how did they stack up there?
Yeah, this is where the difference becomes much more noticeable. The Sony X90L, in their tests, hit 1,600 nits in smaller windows.
Wow, 1,600. That's quite bright for highlights.
It is. And maybe more importantly for overall impact, it managed 800 nits with full screen white. That shows how bright the whole screen can get.
Okay, 800 nits full screen for the Sony. What about the TCL QN6K hitting 750 nits in a 25% window?
Okay, so 750 nits in a fairly large window,
Yeah.
but definitely lower than the Sony's peak small window brightness. And if it's 750 into 25% window, it's almost certainly going to be lower still on a full screen white test, right?
Exactly. It would be significantly lower than the Sony's 800 nits full screen capability. So the takeaway is clear. The Sony can get substantially brighter than the TCL, especially for those bright HDR highlights and overall full screen brightness.
Right. So the source basically concludes you wouldn't worry about the TCL being too bright, particularly in HDR, because the Sony actually measured quite a bit higher in those key HDR metrics. Precisely. And they just reiterate the general advice. If eye comfort is a concern for you or your child, don't run either TV at maximum brightness anyway. Adjust it to a comfortable level for your room.
Okay, so brightness difference, yes, but Sony is brighter in HDR. Eye strain concern. Problem more about viewing time. What about other picture quality aspects like color accuracy?
Yeah, important factor. The Sony X90L, described as very accurate out of the box. The source notes this is pretty typical for Sony. They usually have good color science.
And the TCL QM6K, how did it fare on accuracy?
This was interesting. Quoting the reviewer directly from the source, the TCL QM6K was one of the most accurate TVs tested at its price point.
At its price point, that sounds key. Because
Yo,
these TVs aren't the same price, are they?
not at all. The source mentions the TCL QM6K typically retails for about $200 less than the Sony X90L in the US. And given Inquil's comment about the Sony's cost in Dubai, it sounds like there's a similar, maybe even larger price gap there.
Okay, so let's try and summarize this comparison. You've got the Sony, which has noticeably higher HDR brightness and that typical Sony accuracy. Then you've got the TCL, which is surprisingly accurate for its lower price, slightly brighter in some SDR tests, but can't match the Sony's HDR punch. Given the price difference, what was the overall verdict from the source?
The core takeaway seems to be that if the TCL QM6K has caught your eye, and especially if budget is a factor, you won't be disappointed.
Right.
It delivers really strong performance, particularly that color accuracy considering its price. The source explicitly calls it the best bang for your buck option. It's that classic scenario you get maybe 90%, 95% of the performance of the more expensive model, but for significantly less money.
That makes a lot of sense. Value is key there. One last thing on TVs, and Quill asked about waiting a couple of months for potentially newer models. Did the source see anything coming soon that might compete at that same price point?
Not really, no. The source mentioned they weren't aware of many direct competitors expected in that specific price range within the next couple of months, at least nothing that hadn't already been announced for the year.
Okay.
They did suggest maybe keeping an eye on the Hisense U6QF, which could be similar in price, or possibly models like the Hisense U7QG or the next TCL up, the QM7K, if they happen to go on a good sale and drop down near the QM6K's price. But as things stand, the QM6K looks like a really solid choice for the money, based on the source's info.
Okay, great. So from fine-tuning your picture to picking a new screen, let's completely switch gears now. We're going to look at how video creation is evolving super fast thanks to AI. The source took us, as they put it, across the pond to talk about Google VO3. What exactly is this?
Right, VO3. It's the latest version of Google's AI video generator. They announced it back at Google I/O in mid-May. We've seen AI video generation tools before, but this VO3 has, well, a pretty major upgrade.
A major upgrade. What is it? What's the big new thing here?
The really big deal with V3 is that it's moving into the audio era.
Audio era.
Meaning previous AI video tools mostly just created silent video clips based on your text prompts. VO3, however, can now generate the visuals and add sound effects, background audio, and even speech to the videos it creates.
Wait, hang on. Speech. Like, the AI can make characters or people in the generated video actually talk. It generates dialogue.
Yes, the source explicitly says your AI-generated moving pictures can now talk. It can generate speech, and apparently it can even do it with a series of different accents.
Wow. Okay, that's a significant step up.
It really is. Although the source, who happens to be British, did add a little humorous note that, in their opinion, the AI hasn't quite nailed the British accent just yet. So still some work to do on the authenticity, perhaps.
Fair enough. Needs a bit more dialect coaching, maybe. But the core capability AI generating video with sound effects and spoken dialogue, that's huge. So naturally, people will wonder, how can I try this? How do you get access to VO3, and what does it cost?
Well, this is where it gets, as the source puts it, a little trickier. It's not widely available just yet.
Okay, tricky how?
Two main hurdles right now. First, geography. You apparently have to be physically located in the U.S. to access it currently.
Okay, US only for now. What's the second hurdle?
The second is the subscription requirement. You need to be subscribed to Google's highest level AI plan, which is called the AI Ultra plan.
AI Ultra plan. Okay, this raises the obvious next question. How much does that cost?
Yeah, brace yourself. The source states the Ultra plan costs $250 per month.
Wow. $250 a month.
Yep. The source had a pretty clear reaction to that, basically saying it's a lot of money, and consequently, not many of us will be rushing to try it out right away.
No kidding. Okay, so $250 a month puts it firmly in the professional tool category, or maybe for companies, not really for casual users or hobbyists just wanting to play around.
Definitely seems that way right now, yeah.
And just to confirm, is VO3 part of Google's main AI chatbot, Gemini?
Yes, it's integrated. The source confirms that if you do shell out for that Ultra plan, you access VO3 through the Gemini app. It's part of that premium tier.
Got it. And the source also mentioned something called Flow 4 that you also get access to with the Ultra plan. What's that?
That's right. Flow 4 comes with the Ultra plan access too. The source described Flow 4 as more of a filmmaking service.
Filmmaking service. How does it work?
It uses VO3 for the AI video generation part, and another Google AI tool called Imagine 4 for image generation. But the key difference with Flow 4 seems to be that it also lets you import and incorporate your own image and video files.
Ah, okay. So you can mix AI-generated stuff with your own footage.
Exactly. The idea is to combine everything to create a more polished, film-style piece of video.
Right.
The source also mentioned Flow 4 provides additional controls, things like adjusting camera angles and access to editing suites. So it sounds like a more comprehensive creative platform built on top of VO3 aimed at more involved projects.
Wow. Okay. We definitely covered some diverse ground today, just digging into those few questions from the Digital Trends video.
We really did. We went from the nitty-gritty of TV settings, navigating Apple TV upscaling versus built-in apps,
Right.
to that detailed comparison between the TCL QM6K and the Sony X90L, which had some surprising results on brightness and value.
Yeah, definitely.
And then we jumped right into the future with AI video creation, Google VO3 adding sound and speech, and this Flow 4 platform.
Yeah.
Though that price tag is something else.
It really is. So hopefully this deep dive, pulling out these specific points from the source, gives you, the listener, a clearer view on these different tech areas. Our whole goal here is just to help you cut through all the noise out there and find the information that actually matters for your decision.
Absolutely. And it just highlights how fast things are moving, doesn't it? On so many different tech fronts at the same time.
It really does. Which brings us to a final thought for you to mull over as we wrap up. Think about that speed of change we just talked about, from tiny refinements in TV picture processing that we debate endlessly, to AI tools that can literally invent video with dialogue from scratch. How does this acceleration, this constant evolution, impact the choices you make about technology today? And maybe more provocatively, looking just a little bit ahead, what kinds of new possibilities, or let's be honest, potential challenges too, might these incredibly powerful tools like VO3 create for filmmakers, artists, creators, and just regular consumers like us in the, really near future? Something to think about. Keep exploring, keep questioning.